Hello, welcome back to Mr. Excalibur. My name is Arthur, and well, considering what I have in front of us, cue music. Yes, we actually have a Excalibur sword here. One that is designed to look like the one from the John Boorman movie Excalibur. And so you'll hear me make references to it every once in a while. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys some deboxing here, some unboxing of the sword. I have to say, one of the things that drew me to actually getting this was the fact that Darksword Armoury had come out with a model that looked pretty close to what we saw in the John Boorman movie in Excalibur, and so I thought this was considering my opening, considering my the title of the channel, I thought this was a good review to start off right from the very beginning. So let's take a look at the unboxing.
Here we are unboxing the Darksword Armoury Excalibur sword. One of the things that I've noticed with Darksword Armoury's packaging is that it's extremely minimalist. You have here the shipping container, and then inside there's the sword. You see the two kind of foam black blocks at the at either end, which keeps the sword from punching through. And they're pretty substantial, but I mean, what you see in there right there, that's all the packaging there is. You have the sword, which typically is wrapped separate from the scabbard, and that's also something that is typical of Darksword Armoury. They don't send the sword already in the scabbard. This is something you typically see with a lot of Japanese long swords. They're shipped with them already in the scabbards, the sayas. Not so with Darksword Armoury and their European swords. Here we are just kind of unraveling it, getting it out of, just checking the little metal pieces on the very tip. They were nice and secure. Sorry, this is a little out of camera, but this is what I was doing. One side note, when I got this sword, I actually got it as a deal through DSA. They actually provided a dagger that was kind of a miniature version of the sword. You'll see it here. I don't talk much about it, mainly because it's a little gimmicky, but it was a nice little gift that they added in along with the sword. So again, there's the blocks, and then they have just a simple, kind of printed cardboard sheath that they put over the blade to protect it, and that's pretty much it when it comes to the packaging of it. When I pulled the sword out, the interesting thing about DSA is they don't send it with a great deal of oil. It was very sharp. I did order it sharpened. Now mind you, I ordered this sword directly through Darksword Armoury. And I actually recommend that when it comes to Darksword Armoury, primarily because Darksword really is actually working quite a bit to constantly make a lot of their models a lot better. And if you saw my review on the Enderal sword, that was a pretty good example of how they've done a lot to make that sword better. This one actually is another example. I'll talk about it a little bit later when I talk about the statistics, the stats for the sword. So if you see right in the foreground of the screen here, you see the little dagger version of Excalibur, or the Excalibur dagger, I guess you could say, and that was given as a free gift. Now here's just an example of how sharp this sword is. This is a European sword. Now I did get it sharpened, and it primarily is a single bevel grind that I think they just roughed just a little bit to give it just an extra edge. So it was pretty nice. Here's an up close look at the sword itself, the blade. Really looking nice. I am going to be talking about here in a little bit some of the issues I have with the proportions when compared. Here I'm showing the peened handle. The pommel and crossguard are both brass, and so the steel that comes through, they really couldn't grind it over to make it completely blend in, so they just make sure it's nice and smooth, and it has a nice peened pommel, which is really nice. Out of the box, I have to admit, this sword, while rather weighty, really had a nice feel to it. It really had a nice solid build to the sword itself. Now, here was one little issue that I did have, and then when trying to put the sword into the scabbard, it was an awfully tight fit. But as I'll mention later, when I took the sword out for testing and put a little bit of WD-40 on it, it loosened it up really fast, and to the point now where it moves out, it comes out smoothly, but it still holds on to it. It doesn't fall out when you turn it upside down. So overall, right out of the box, I was pretty impressed.
We're back, and again we're with the Darksword Armoury's version of Excalibur from the John Boorman movie of the very same name, Excalibur. What we're going to look at here now are some pieces of some footage from particularly a guy by the name of Jason Woodard, who I guess got one of these things not too long ago and did some pretty extensive testing with the blade. And what it really shows is just how good of a blade that Darksword Armoury's got on this particular sword. So, and then after that, we're going to transition into my own sword tests when I took this thing out to swing it around and cut through some stuff with it. So, here's that footage.
So this is Jason Woodard's footage on what DSA's Excalibur sword is doing. Here he is, of course, going through some water jugs. And, you know, it's no surprise that it goes through as what it does. Here in this next clip, you see him going through a heavy water bottle and just showing how it just, you know, smashes through it. Not necessarily clean cut, but then again, it really doesn't have to. All of this stuff came with a similar conclusion by Woodard at the end, where he basically says, you know, no edge rolling, no real damage on the blade. And you know what, in my own testing, as we'll show here in just a little bit, we saw the same thing. Now here's something that Woodard does do that I'm not too big on, and that is showing what the model you have versus, you know, another model that's got the similar look. Not something that I would encourage, but you know, he's doing it here, and then he goes one step farther here, and after some damage, bing, yeah, run right off the top. And then, you know, at the end of each of these, again, comes up to the camera and shows, hey, you know what, no big damage on the sword. What this is, though, is it's a pretty good testament to what DSA is now making these swords out of. It's this really durable 5160 spring steel that they've got going for all of their swords. And that's saying quite a bit. I mean, yeah, the one he's holding up there probably was, you know, a $100 piece of junk. But, you know, just look at the chunks that he's taking out of it, and, you know, the fact that he cleaved a part of it off of it. You know, so much for Mythbusters showing that. They apparently had an episode where, no, you really can't, you know, break the top of a sword off. Well, there he is. He just showed that he could. Now, of course, he's using it as an axe, not necessarily because you're going to do this when you take it home, but just showing what the thing can take. And again, at the end of each one of these clips, he says, you know, no edge rolling, all the fittings are still tight. And in this last clip, he just plows it right through a metal trash can lid just to show what it can do. So I didn't show all the clips, although this one here where he's, you know, shoving it through a metal trash can lid, I decided to put quite a bit of it in. I hope he doesn't mind, but this really was a good, nice panoramic view of some torture testing that he put it through, and also a pretty good testament to DSA's quality in their construction of the blade for the sword. Couldn't happen to a nicer model. Alrighty, it's my turn with Excalibur. Right out of the scabbard, the sword, as I mentioned before and during the unboxing, it has a really nice feel to it. It is a single-handed sword. You can kind of pile on both hands barely onto the handle, but overall it has a nice feel in one hand. The scabbard really was a nice change from what I've seen before. Very nice sturdy scabbard. Wasn't overly tight on the sword after kind of putting some WD-40 on the blade. It was really nice. Yep, looking for bees still. But I did try some single-handed sword techniques here, trying with some of the bottles, and mind you, it's a European sword, so this thing is not necessarily razor sharp. And what I found was that overall the sword tended to just pile through anything what I was attempting to cut through. But I mean, it did a pretty fair job. So here we go, some cutting. And so here's the the first victim, and down it goes. It hacks it, but it doesn't necessarily slice it all the way through. It's a pretty beefy blade, so I found that it wasn't necessarily a clean cut through any of these. But it did, it cut just fine. One of the things I really noticed about the sword was I didn't end up taking any pictures of this or showing it in the video footage. I probably should have. I saw no scratches on this blade whatsoever after putting it through anything. Any of the previous videos you may have seen where I had some Japanese long swords using these same things, as razor sharp as they were, and some of them actually made of the same kind of steel. This sword is made of 5160 high carbon spring steel, and this one had absolutely no scrapes on the blade whatsoever after doing any of this. Now, this milk bottle was a lot of fun to cut with this sword. And down it goes. So yeah, actually, and with one milk bottle, still got quite a few, quite a good swipes. So here we are in this heavy TV box that's just about all torn up by now. I think I'm gonna have to need to get a new one, or maybe I just need to buy another TV. I don't know. What are you buying a TV for? Well, I want to stab a sword through it. What? No. So drove it into it. This was just, tip first. This thing is filled with a lot of other cardboard fillers as well as styrofoam. So it gives a really nice, good resistance as far as how much force it takes to drive it through this pretty heavy cardboard. This has proved to be an actual pretty good test material to test out some of these swords on. And in these pics, we've seen just how far I was able to push it through, just a moderate stick through. And there it is, suspended by its own weight, having driven through 4 or 5 inches out the other side. So here was a real big surprise in comparison with some other swords I had. I decided to just take this thing, just whomp right there, and how far that sword went down into that really thick cardboard. Take a look at the pictures here in a second. It shows just how far this sword just plowed through. And this is indicative of, you know, a more European style sword, where the blade isn't quite as sharp as some of the Japanese swords, but the weight of the thing just drives it through so much of this material. It's pretty impressive. So overall, the Darksword Armoury Excalibur really performed really quite well. Despite all that, as usual, per the program, every time you play around with these swords and you're cutting up water bottles or whatever you're doing, wipe off your sword. You may have touched it, you may have gotten water on it. You always want to make sure that you put some kind of lubricant on it. I like WD-40. It's a nice thin liquid that also not only protects the blade, but also does clean it if you have anything on it. That material, of course, then gets into the scabbard and kind of loosens it up. It helps to protect the sword as well. And so yeah, just make sure you clean off your swords after you're done playing with them in the backyard, or for that matter, anywhere. Just make sure you clean them off. In this section, I wanted to talk about the build, how this sword is constructed. And what's an interesting topic to note here is that like some other models from Darksword Armoury that I have seen, this continues to be something that evolves, and that is a good thing for this company, because if you have looked up any information about it, you probably notice that there are some people that really like Darksword Armoury, there are some that do not. Now I will have to admit that some of these pictures showing a couple things here that I didn't find very consistent was they show that the cross was a polished brass, and in some of these pictures you see it more of a kind of a brushed look, like the one you see right here. The one I got, my copy of this model, the crossguard was a brushed brass hilt. I'm going to get a little bit more into that when looking at this sword versus the actual one from the movies, but the pommel here is actually a good example of what I mean by the difference in the build. I placed the slide from Cult of Athena showing how much it was on their website. I don't recommend getting it from them, at least for right now, for one simple reason. They still have models of this sword that they claim that the pommel has been threaded on. When I saw it there, I actually emailed up Darksword Armoury and asked them about this, and they said, well, yes, up until just recently, the pommels were threaded, but now they're hot peened. They're being peened over, which is a better way to construct this sword, especially if you're going to take it out and actually, swing it around and use it. So it's a perfect example of, absolutely nothing against Cult of Athena, but they have a very large inventory. So large that they may have slightly older versions of this sword, and the newer versions of it coming out of Darksword Armoury are a superior build, and the pommel is an example of that. So just be leery about who you order it through, because there are improvements being made to this sword. This being Excalibur, I really wanted to, I guess, get a little nitpicky here. If you see in these pictures, there are some proportion issues versus the one that Darksword Armoury made, and something I'll point out a little bit more in a little bit. You'll notice that the Nigel Terry here is actually able to get two hands around the handle. The one from Darksword Armoury, not necessarily the case. You'll notice that the blade is actually a very straight blade and actually tapers only almost to the very end. You'll see another picture here with Nigel Terry holding it straight up, and that also being the case. The proportion of the hilt and the pommel also were a little off. They needed to be a little larger to be exactly like the one from the movie. But again, just being nitpick because it's Excalibur.
Alright, so my overall impression with DSA's attempt here at the Excalibur sword. Let's take a look at it. Now, as you guys heard in the unboxing, initially the scabbard was really tight. In fact, I actually had to, as you may have seen in there, I actually had to shove it down in there. But after I used it in my own cutting tests, I gave it a good, just a little bit of WD-40, just a little bit of light lubricant, and it loosens up just fine. Not too loose, it still has a nice tight fit to it. Now, I have to say that overall, Darksword Armoury did a damn good job with this sword. I mean, they really upped their game. If my experience with their Andril sword was any kind of baseline, I'd say they're definitely an improvement. It is a solid build of a sword, and I really enjoyed swinging it around. It's got a nice sharp edge. It's a European sword, so it's not going to have a katana sharp edge to it, but I mean, you saw what it did to a couple of the bottles. It did a nice job. Jason Woodard's footage shows really what the 5160 steel blade that DSA put with this can do. Can take a lot of punishment, take a lot of licking. It's interesting that I got this now because probably about 15-20 years ago I bought another version of this, and it had the wire wrap handle, and it had the brass crossguard, and it had the brass pommel and the whole bit, but the proportions were completely off. And that's actually what I want to talk about now. As you guys heard in my comparison with the movie, the movie sword, one of the impressions that I got that I mentioned when I was opening the box was that the proportions of this for a copy of what we saw in John Boorman's movie are off. Some of the things that I suggested when looking at some of the pictures in comparison to DSA's version, again, was a slightly longer blade, a straight blade, not necessarily tapered except right to the very end. An enlarged crossguard, a slightly longer handle, not too much longer, and a longer pommel. But overall, this build of the sword is really good. You can really see a lot of improvements that Darksword Armoury has made on their swords. One of the critical big kind of bugaboos that people have had with DSA has been the space between the hilt and the blade. And as you guys see in some of the standard pictures, which are accurate for my copy of this model, they've really cinched that up. It's a nice clean fit. It's a nice tight fit right there at the base of the blade. There's no creaking, there's no groaning. It's a solid build. One of the other big things has been a gripe that people have had with DSA swords is that the blade rattles in the sword. Well, a little bit, but not a lot. And look at that. I mean, yeah, it's going to be a generic fit down here, but these two extra ridges that they placed here really give it a nice heavy build. It rattles a little bit, but it's a nice comfortable fit into the scabbard. overall, when it comes to whether or not this sword is actually worth it or not, I'm really divided. And the reason is because, as you guys have seen in the other previous parts of this video, this is a movie from my childhood, and obviously my own name, I've got a bit of attachment to it. But this movie in particular was and has continued to be my favorite version of the whole Arthurian tale, mythology, what have you. And for someone like Darksword Armoury, who've actually gotten other movie swords real well, the Anduril sword that they did, the size, proportions, and everything were just right. About the only thing that they may be able to do a little bit better on that sword, kind of as a side issue, is they might want to make the blade a little bit longer, which would make it a lot heavier, so maybe that's why they didn't do it. Everything else was fine. This one, it's a really nice sword. However, in the end, when it comes down to, unfortunately, when they decided to go there and make it an Excalibur sword from the John Boorman movie, this misses the mark. I'm sorry, guys. It's a really nice one-handed sword, and I was just talking about this to a friend of mine, saying how much I really like this and how much I really wanted the proportions of this to be a lot better. They really did a bang-up job, a really nice blade, fun to swing around, but the handle proportions just kind of throw it off. And actually they wouldn't have to change the blade very much. It's a nice blade, but they might want to, if DSA is listening, maybe change the proportions of the handle a little bit more. This needs to be a little wider, I should say a little bit longer and a little bit wider. The pommel needs to be a little bit bigger. The handle needs to be, as you guys saw in the pictures from the movie, a little bit longer so you can just get two hands around it. Now, you can see my hands just barely get it, and I'm covering the pommel. That's not what you saw in the movie. That's an easy thing to fix. And actually, if they did that and actually left this blade, you can forgive the blade not being exactly straight like you saw in the movie. But overall, I'd say it's an excellent sword. But if you're looking, and you're someone like me is kind of real stickler for something that's accurate to the movie, this slightly misses the mark. It just misses it. And so there you have it. I hope this has been informative. It's certainly been fun. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.